Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to have addiction recovery specialist and my new friend, Lance Wright, with me today. Lance, hi.
Hello, Supatra. Good to see you again.
You too. Lance and I met because we both were very honored to be chosen for TEDx Temecula. And Lance really has an amazing story, an amazing speech. And so I had to have him on my podcast because I really do want to pick his brain some more and learn more about him. So I'm going to read you a little bit about Lance, and then I am going to drill him with all of my questions. Lance Wright is an addiction recovery specialist with over 32 years of sobriety and is the founder of Life Over Addiction, a program that helps individuals and families navigate recovery with compassion and clarity. His raw and redemptive personal story, from addiction and incarceration to healing and service, fuels his mission to reframe addiction as a survival mechanism rather than a moral failing. Through his work, Lance draws on the science of neuroplasticity to show that recovery is not just possible, but deeply transformative. His approach blends education, collaboration, and daily practice to help people rewire destructive narratives, rebuild trust, and rediscover purpose. Today, he empowers others to move beyond shame, reconnect with themselves, and embrace recovery as a lifelong path to healing and wholeness. Lance, welcome.
Man, good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yay.
Appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so excited. You really did impress me with just your raw honesty and just how vulnerable you were up on stage. And I think people who are struggling with addiction or anyone who knows somebody struggling with addiction can really gain something from your message. So I really want to, as much as you feel comfortable, go into your history. If you can just give us a glimpse into what your life was like before recovery, that can be from early on as you like, and then what emotional forces were driving all of your behavior back then.
Well, I think when you define addiction, it's the beginning point of every conversation we're going to explore today, because the understanding of addiction in society is people that have a problem with substances or alcohol or criminal behavior or eating or gambling. And those are all external manifestations of an internal problem with our thinking. You heard me speak, and I'm a firm believer that every one of us on this planet is raised in a certain way where our little supercomputers are programmed. The little girl in you, the little boy in me, and we experience things. And if some of those things aren't necessarily healthy or positive, how does that impact one's programming growing up? And it might be small, it might be big, and it might be in different areas. But for me growing up, and I didn't really learn everything I'm sharing with you now and the ability to be vulnerable with it until I got into recovery in like 93, 94, 95 while I was incarcerated. But up to that point, it was just the way things are. It's how we do things. I talk to the clients a lot about it every day, and I'm very vulnerable with them because I can't expect them to understand something that they've never heard or seen themselves. And so for me, my journey and my story and my programming, or how I developed the way I see the world or myself, and it started as a little boy. And, you heard me speak, but really my earliest memories were being home alone in the bed with my little dachshund Duchess in the middle of the night, wondering if mom was going to come home. And so my earliest moments in life were home with my little dachshund dog Duchess, wondering if mom was going to come home. I had to learn how to feed myself, take care of myself from a very young age. when I think about it and I see a little 4-year-old, like when my niece lived with me, I'm wondering, how did I survive? How did I make it through that? And today I believe firmly in a higher power or God of my understanding that had my back, even when I didn't, nobody else did. But those early impressions in my programming where I'm alone, I'm different, I'm abandoned, those spaces within that many people may experience in life and gloss over or not think of. But those little programming start to evolve over time. Kindergarten, I had ADHD and couldn't sit still. First grade, second grade, third grade. And teachers didn't know what to do with me. So they'd put me in the principal's office on that little bench and say, just give him something to read, give him something to do. It wasn't that I was stupid because I could do all the work. I just couldn't sit still. And nobody really asked what the problem was. They just punished the behavior.
Mm.
So that little kid that felt abandoned and alone and scared goes into a school system that says you're different, you don't belong, and you're separate. And I'm not saying that the school system or my mom or anybody had these intentions. This isn't a blame, right or wrong thing. It's just facts that an evolution of a child. And by 6 years old, I had a very definitive perception of myself as that little bastard kid that nobody loved and cared about, that I was different and that, I was alone in the world. And so by that time, I had started to evolve and had a few friends in my neighborhood that were like-minded. Not how do you call a 6 or 7-year-old a troublemaker? We'd hang out, and one of the things that we do is play pinball down at the ground bus station. And not having a father and mom being WIC welfare and food stamps and doing the best she could to put food and pay the bills, I never had things. And so my friends would give me a quarter here or there, an extra game. But I always felt different or less than people because I didn't have what they had. And it was reinforcing that internal dialogue I had about myself, that perception, that narrative, that programming, that story. And so one day coming home from school, this is where my addiction started. You can see the programming, me coming home from school with this programming or wherever I was at coming home. And I saw a rack of the old Coke bottles or a couple racks of Coke bottles in somebody's yard. And I said, I know those are quarters because I've taken them to the store for my mom before. So I grabbed those little couple racks of Coke bottles and off to the store I went. Now, of course, I wouldn't perceive it as stealing or theft. We'll call it requisitioning at that age. And I had a handful of quarters all of a sudden. I was somebody. I had what you had. Matter of fact, I had more than what you had, and I couldn't wait to get to the pinball place at the Greyhound bus depot to give you quarters and to play 10 or 15 games. And that little kid that felt like the little bastard kid disappeared for a minute. I found an identity and a sense of belonging and being that I had not experienced, and I had money and I was up here. It was my first drug, really, to think about it. It changed how I perceived myself in the world. And
Wow.
people like me. They were like, oh, that's great. You're giving us quarters. It's Lance. But the problem with anything that gives us those immediate relief like that is when those quarters were gone, that little bastard kid showed up in all his glory. And now mom's purse, the piggy banks, grandma's piggy banks. I was like, I found something that makes me feel normal. It changes how I feel about myself. And of course, it looks innocent. This little kid stealing quarters to play pinball or whatever. But that led to somebody teaching me how to shoplift so I could get good clothes and have things. And so I was beginning to be a little thief, and stealing and having things like other kids had was giving me this false identity, or it was helping me navigate away from the identity I didn't want, didn't like.
Mm.
And it was peers and friends that were like accepting and family and like, yay. And this little kid was finding a sense of purpose and an identity. And by 9, I was a little thief, to be honest. But we were in Northern California at an aunt's house, and my mom up to that point had taught me drugs was bad. And my aunt went under the couch, Northern California, pulled out the tray and rolled a cigarette. Passed it to my uncle, passed it to my mom, passed it to my cousin, who passed it to me. I'm going to do what they're doing. This must be okay. I choked and coughed and Everybody laughed. By the time it got around the second or third time, smoking pot was something I really liked. It made me
Mm.
lay back. I was cool. And now I had another thing that helped me change the space in here and in here. And from stealing and pot, it got into burglaries and trying everything but real hard drugs. And of course, with that, juvenile halls, youth authorities, camps, programs, I was reprobate, so to speak. And nobody really ever questioned, why is this kid screwed up? It was, you broke the law, you did bad, we're putting you in a facility, we're locking you down, boom, boom. And I'm
Mhm.
not blaming anybody. It was just the system and how the system's set up. It's like if your son or your daughter get in trouble and you send them to their room without their phone for an evening and you don't explain why you're taking the phone, they're not going to learn why you're taking their phone. And so I grew up in an environment where incarceration or programming was the solution to my problems, and nobody really ever asked or explored it with me. And so my life up to 16 progressively got worse. Like we talk about alcohol or substances, my lifestyle progressed to a point where I was in a program for like 6 months behind the juvenile hall where they were trying to fix me. And in that program, I got taken home one night by my counselor and I found out my mom was dying of cancer. He told me, and I didn't hear cancer. I heard, mom's going to die. As this little, because I might have been 16, but I was more like 8 inside my head and my heart because I really never matured because I'd been just escaping reality all my life up to that point. And so my mom was diagnosed with cancer and I can't deal with that. I'm very empathic and it was too much for me. And I was already in a drug induced culture and lifestyle. So I just ran away. And over the next 3 years, I found methamphetamine. And the problem with drugs for me is I have mental health problems. I have ADHD. That's why I couldn't sit still in school. Well, right after I found out my mom was diagnosed with cancer, I met some people that said, "Hey, you want to do some meth?" I don't even know what that is. I thought it was like cocaine. You do it, it's high for a few minutes, and then you go whatever. So I was messing with these people and ended up doing methamphetamine with them. And when I first ingested that substance and it entered my system, my ADHD, it was like my entire life was like going through life like the Star Trek Enterprise through warp speed.
Wow.
And when I put that substance in my system, it was like coming out of warp speed in front of a planet and be like, I never even knew you have area. Amazing. I could see it was clarity. It was a euphoria. It was everything that I had never experienced. And it took away all the feelings, all the pain, all that. It was like
Wow.
the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And I remember saying, and I share this, I where's this been my whole life? I never not want to feel this way. And obviously, with a substance like that, and looking back on my life and the broken soul that I was when I was introduced to that, already broken, it just was off. And 3 years later, my mom died of cancer. I had turned off any relationship with God or anything decent and didn't care. And I was associated with some people doing some bad behaviors and actions. And in May of 1984, I committed a drug-related homicide, second-degree homicide. I speak it openly and I don't minimize my actions because I want to honor Matthew, the man who died, and his mother, Miss Ellis, and his wife, Tina, and his son, Brandon, and their family. I live and do today is to honor them and Matthew. And of course, my life and my journey, because I can see how I ended up there and how that man didn't deserve what happened to him any more than I did. And that's not a justification or a rationalization. It's just that I am responsible for my actions and I live accordingly today. But I didn't really get that when I was arrested and was sent off to the prison with a 17-year, 4-month to life sentence. I continued to do the same things because it's the only way I knew how to cope with self, with the reality of my life. And inside, I was a piece of garbage, dirty, no good, should burn in hell. That was my self perception by that point in life. And my first 9 years, I continued to do the same thing. By day, I looked like this by day. You will know at night when the door racked that I had drugs in the cell, and my roommate and I would every night get high. It was kind of my coping mechanism to deal with a place I couldn't cope. But 9 years into that life sentence, 3 months to my first parole board hearing, I got caught for possession of methamphetamine for distribution and being high as a kite. And I'm in an ad seg cell, and I came out of psychosis about 3 days later, and it was March 11th when I came out of it about 1:30 in the morning. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think that you're going to die in prison at that point. But I remember that night vividly. It was probably like we talked about disruption. It was the first real disruption in the programming when I stopped and I stepped back, and it was like an out of body experience in that morning, crying and sobbing and weeping. And I looked at my life. I remember saying, how did this happen? This is not who I am. And it was an angry statement internally, like looking at my life, because I knew that person isn't who I am, but I didn't know how, why, or what to do with it. I just knew I didn't want it anymore. And so, at that point, I had surrendered to the fact that I didn't want that lifestyle anymore, but I didn't know what this new one was going to look like. And you didn't hear me, and I didn't speak about this. This is the first time you're hearing about it. But one of the more pivotal points in my life was 3 months later when we went to the parole hearing. And two things really stood out to me and still stand out. One is I got to go into the parole board and say, look, I have problems. I don't know the answers, but I'm committed to finding out why and changing them. And they were like, finally, you woke up. And it was really authentically me saying, I'm broken and I know that I'm going to figure this thing out. And they just were like, okay, great. But in that hearing, Matthew's mom, Miss Ellis, talked about him as a little boy growing up.
Oh.
And every word she said, I felt small enough to slither through a crack in the ground.
Wow.
My self-judgment was overwhelming.
Yeah.
And at the end of her share, she looked over and she made eye contact. And she said, we're Christians. We don't believe in hate. It would serve no purpose. We forgive you.
Oh.
Okay. But then she said, we don't understand how you could have done this to our loved one and our family. And so I believe that day God spoke through her and gave me a spirit or an insight or something I didn't have in the emptiness of my within space, and a direction to figure out my life and to change. And over the course of the rest of my 18 years after that of incarceration, because I did a total of 27 years, she began to be a chief advocate for my release, because I had found a mentor that about a year and a half later in an AA meeting in prison, some Opie Taylor sober kid said, you should go to those meetings when you heard my story. I'm trying to keep my bad language down here, but
You're great.
Right? Yeah, I should probably be in those meetings, even though I don't think they work. So I'm sitting in these meetings with Opie Taylor, and I'm like, okay, I'm here. But they're giving you a chrono that says you're a good boy and you're going to meetings. So, yeah, it's a manipulative thing. Hey, I'm doing good, right? I don't know what any of this recovery stuff means, but I'm going to meetings. But in those meetings, there was one night a new guy came to the prison to the meeting, and he didn't talk about drugs and alcohol when he shared. He talked about pain growing up. He talked about losing his sister at Christmas and blaming himself, and how his girlfriend was horrifically attacked by two brothers, and how he took justice and became a monster and a major gang member, and how he was pissed off and wanted to meet this God, and how he was on death row and a nun told him he wasn't going to die. And that year on his birthday, the death penalty was ruled unconstitutional in California. And how he went to prison, and some old guy named David G came in doing hospitals and institutions work and running meetings, and told my sponsor, Richard, you're full of shit. If you want help, ask me. Don't waste my time. And Richard was the kind of person that respected that level of communication. So Rich said, hey, I started working with David. He made suggestions. I do them. We went through the steps. I still do them. They work pretty good. They might work for you. And he kind of just tossed the mic. And I was like, that's the first person I've ever heard that talked about transformation and recovery that made sense. I didn't know how he,
Wow.
but he had my attention. And he spoke from the heart. And like you said earlier when we first started this, his vulnerability attracted me. His honesty and authenticity made me think there was hope.
Mm.
And from that point on, my life began to change. He wasn't one of those people that said, you have to do anything. He said, let's sit down over lunch and talk about step one. Step two, let's meet on the yard and talk about step three as a group of us, like 8 or 10 of us. And he was taking us and teaching us what the 12 steps were so that we would be comfortable saying, hey, Rich, would you sponsor me? And the rest is history. Richard was not, I can't say that. He was kind of heart and an authentic, Supatra, I care about you. I know you have a problem. You know, I can help you with the problem, but I'm not going to fix it for you. I can show you how and help you get there. That's the most horrible place ever, that somebody sees you and knows you and you know they can help you. It's very difficult, but he was a
Mhm.
master of it. And over the course of years, I learned to enjoy vulnerability and being honest, because he said honesty will produce stronger character and ultimately happiness. And that's the truth. And that
That
was,
is so beautiful.
yeah. And so that's kind of where I met Richard. And then he left, and there was a bunch of us on the yard that were like, oh God, Richard's gone. What do we do? And some of us just looked at one another and said, we've been doing this 10 or 12 years. Let's just keep doing what we do. Because he had already taught us how to be men. Really undercover, he was helping us grow up and take accountability for our lives, and learned that amends was honoring those people we've hurt, including ourselves, by living differently and helping others.
Wow. Where did he go?
He left to another yard because he was human, and he had his issues, and there was a female officer, and the rest is history on that note. It happens in there. And after as many years as he did, the vulnerability showed up, and he could, it was like an addiction. It was like a drug, and so he fell into that, and he ended up being transferred to another prison. And I believe around 2009, he was diagnosed with cancer in his liver. And the Archdiocese in Los Angeles, Father Greg Boyle, and a few other real prominent people in LA went to the court and petitioned for a compassionate release. And it was granted. And he came home that day. He got out, he came home, saw a few people, hung out with his kids, ate peach ice cream, they say, because that's what he always wanted. And that evening fell asleep in his wife's lap and passed away.
Oh my goodness.
But he died a free man, and he's helped thousands. I can't even count how many people, because for every one of us that he's helped, and there's hundreds, probably thousands of us, each one of us is doing the work that he gave us. So the
Wow.
spirit lives on, and he would say it's not his spirit, it's God working through him and through us, because he never took credit for the work.
Oh, Lance. Oh my gosh. I can't even get through this story without just tears. And I think you are so right that there is so much power in vulnerability. I mean, Brene Brown did a whole TED talk on that in
Yes.
and of itself. And it's so true. When we can be raw and honest and speak from our hearts and admit our faults and our wrongdoings and ask for forgiveness and then carry it forward as a mission, you are a living example of redemption and purpose. And I'm awestruck. I'm just so incredibly glad to know you. I mean, everyone, when he gave his TED talk, he was so vulnerable, and people that my friends who were there were saying that they were so just hanging on every word and just wanting and wishing the best for him. And so when he was done the speech, everybody just stood up and gave a standing ovation because it was just so beautiful.
And I was
So
sitting there going, Jonathan, get out here and get me off of this stage.
I know it felt like forever. It was just like, oh, when is he coming? Oh my gosh. But
Yeah.
Lance, I can't believe it, but we're out of time for this half of the podcast. But I'm so glad. I really just wanted to hear this story because I know anyone listening is just going to be inspired, especially if they're struggling themselves or they know someone who's struggling. There's so much humanity and so much to learn behind addiction. So, in the next half, we're going to get into how you are helping people and what the trajectory of that has been. So, everybody, you got to come back for the second half of this podcast because Lance is, just he's my heart fella. He's just such a good guy. So, please come back for the second half. And, Lance, I know you're coming back. So, thank you all for joining us. Tune in next time for the second half of this amazing interview with addiction recovery specialist Lance Wright. Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. Please remember, the contents shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight Podcast tab. And follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.